I signed the last deed transfer on a Tuesday morning in March, and my wife kissed me on the cheek and told me I was the most generous man she had ever known. 3 years later, she stood in our kitchen and told me I was dead weight, that I had held her back, that a woman like her deserved a partner who had actually built something with his hands besides calluses and debt. I looked at her for a long moment, and I said, "You're right. Let's end this." She smiled like she had already won. She had no idea I had been recording our house for the past 4 months. My name is Daniel Hartwell, and I am 63 years old. I spent 35 years building custom furniture and cabinetry out of a workshop in Knoxville, Tennessee. Nothing fancy. Solid oak tables, hand-fitted dovetail joints, the kind of work that takes patience and leaves splinters in your fingers no matter how careful you are. I was not a wealthy man, but I was a careful one. I saved. I paid off my house. I kept every receipt and every bank statement in a fireproof box under my workbench, the way my father taught me, because my father always said that paper was the only thing that told the truth. I met my wife at a church fundraiser in the fall of 2010. She was 41 years old, recently relocated from Atlanta, and she was the kind of woman who knew exactly how to walk into a room. Her name was Christine. She had dark hair and quick eyes and a way of listening to you that made you feel like you were the most interesting person she had ever met. She told me she had left a bad marriage behind her in Georgia, that she was starting fresh, that she believed in people who built things with their own hands. She said that like it meant something. I believed her, because I wanted to. We dated for 18 months. We married in June of 2012. She moved into my house on Maple Ridge Drive, the house I had owned outright since 2004, and she hung curtains in the windows and put flowers on the porch and made it look like something out of a magazine. I thought that was the best thing that had ever happened to me. 6 months after the wedding, Christine told me about her dream. She had always wanted to open an event planning business. High-end weddings, corporate galas, the kind of work that required real capital to get started. She had the connections, she said. She had the taste and the vision. What she needed was a partner who believed in her. She looked at me across the dinner table with those quick eyes and she said, "Daniel, I know this sounds like a lot, but I really think we could build something together." I asked her how much she needed to get started. She said, at minimum, around 80,000. But if we could do it right, closer to 150. I did not say yes that night. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I walked through my workshop and I looked at the tools my father had left me and I thought about what it meant to invest in someone. Christine was my wife. She was smart and capable and she had never once given me a reason to doubt her. I had money set aside. I had the equity in the house. My father had left me a small parcel of land outside Maryville that I had never done anything with. I told myself this was what marriage was. You believed in each other. Over the next 4 years, I gave Christine $162,000. $40,000 came from my savings. $38,000 came from refinancing the house I had paid off. $60,000 came from selling my father's land to a developer who wanted to put up a storage facility. The remaining $24,000 came from a home equity line I opened in the spring of 2015, working extra projects on evenings and weekends to cover the payments. I kept a ledger. Every dollar was documented. Christine's business, which she had incorporated as Hartwell Event Group with herself as sole officer, grew steadily. By 2016, she had a staff of 4 and a client list that included 2 Fortune 500 companies based in Nashville. By 2017, the business was generating over $400,000 in annual revenue. She opened a second office in Chattanooga. She bought a company vehicle, a black Cadillac Escalade. She attended industry conferences in Miami and Chicago and Las Vegas. I stayed home and built furniture and paid the mortgage on a house that had once been mine free and clear. I told myself I was proud of her. And I was. I am not a man who holds back something that is genuinely earned. Christine had built something real. The problem, which I did not see clearly until much later, was that she had built it with my foundation and had very quietly removed my name from the deed. The first sign I missed came in 2017, when I asked Christine if we should look at formalizing my contribution to the business. Maybe a partial ownership stake, or at minimum a formal loan agreement with repayment terms. She laughed and said the accountant had advised against mixing personal and business assets. She said it so easily that I nodded and went back to my workshop. The second sign came in early 2019, when she started working late several nights a week. She said the Chattanooga office was struggling and she needed to be more hands-on. I drove down there one Saturday without telling her, just to drop off lunch. The office was closed. Her car was not in the lot. I called her and she said she was at a vendor meeting in a restaurant across town. Maybe she was. I did not push it. The third sign came that Christmas, when she bought herself a bracelet that cost more than I made in a month, and told me it was a gift from a grateful client. I did not recognize the jewelry box. I did not ask. By the spring of 2021, I was 61 years old, living in a house I owed $104,000 on, working 6 days a week to stay current on the payments, and my wife was running a company worth close to $2 million that bore our last name and contained none of my rights. The morning everything changed. Christine came downstairs in a blazer I had never seen and told me she wanted to talk. She sat at the kitchen table, and she looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you have outgrown and said, "Daniel, I think we both know this hasn't been working for a long time." I set down my coffee. "What do you mean?" "I mean us. I mean this." She gestured vaguely at the kitchen, at me, at the whole house. "I have worked incredibly hard to build something meaningful. And you've been supportive. I know that. But I need a partner who matches where I am now. Someone in my world. You are a wonderful man, but your world is this workshop and I have moved past that." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not surprise. Something more like recognition. "You want a divorce," I said. "I think it's the right thing for both of us." She folded her hands on the table. "I've already spoken with an attorney. I want to keep the business, obviously. I'm proposing a clean split of personal assets and a modest settlement for you, given that the business growth was entirely my work, entirely her work." I thought about the deed to my father's land, about the refinancing paperwork, about the $40,000 that had come out of an account my mother had helped me open when I was 19 years old. I thought about 63 years of keeping every receipt. "Fine," I said. She looked slightly surprised. She had probably expected me to argue, maybe to cry. I did neither. I stood up, rinsed my coffee cup, and went out to the workshop. That evening, after Christine went to bed, I sat at my workbench and I made a list. Not of grievances, of questions. The kind of questions a careful man asks when he has just been told that 4 years of his financial life amounted to nothing. I thought about the security camera. Back in the fall of 2020, we had a series of break-ins on Maple Ridge Drive. 3 houses in 6 weeks, one of them 2 doors down from us. Christine had been nervous about it, especially because she kept expensive equipment in the home office she had set up in our spare bedroom. I had installed a wireless camera in the main living area, angled to cover the front door and the hallway. It uploaded to a cloud account automatically. I had set it up, tested it, and then essentially forgotten about it, the way you forget about smoke detectors until something starts burning. I opened the cloud account on my laptop and looked at the storage. 14 months of footage, organized by date, hour by hour. I sat there for a moment with my hand on the mouse, and I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be. Whether I was the kind of man who looked, or the kind who kept not looking and called it trust. I clicked on a file from 8 months earlier, a Wednesday afternoon in November, when Christine had told me she was in Nashville for a vendor meeting and would not be home until late. She was home by 2 in the afternoon. She was not alone. The man who walked through my front door behind her was around 55, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the easy confidence of someone who had never once worried about a mortgage payment. He was wearing a sport coat that cost more than my best set of chisels. He put his hand on my wife's back and she leaned into him like they had been doing this for years, because they had. I watched them sit on my couch. I watched my wife pour 2 glasses of wine from a bottle she took out of a cabinet I had never seen her open. I watched them talk and laugh and behave like 2 people who were completely at home. Then I heard my wife say, "He doesn't suspect anything. He's just grateful I'm still there." The man laughed. "How much longer?" "I filed the paperwork last week," Christine said. Once the divorce is settled and the business transfer is clean, I'm done. I paused the footage. I sat in my workshop in the dark and I breathed very carefully for about 5 minutes. Then I went back and started from the beginning. What I found over the next 3 nights of watching was worse than an affair. The affair I could have survived. What I found was a business plan. A carefully structured multi-year plan to extract my assets, build a company in my name that contained none of my legal rights, and then discard me cleanly before I was old enough to cause real trouble. In one recording from 7 months ago, Christine was on the phone while the silver-haired man sat across from her at my kitchen table reviewing documents. She was talking to someone about a corporate restructuring. She mentioned the original capital contributions and how they had been classified as personal gifts rather than equity investments. She mentioned that the company valuation was now high enough that any challenge I brought would require legal fees I could not afford. In another recording from 4 months ago, they were talking about the house. Christine said, "The mortgage balance is still high enough that he won't clear much in a sale. By the time he pays the realtor and settles the equity line, he'll have maybe $40,000 left. That's not enough to hire anyone serious." The silver-haired man said, "You really did think of everything." Christine smiled and said, "I learned a long time ago that the best time to plan an exit is before you make an entrance." I wrote that sentence down in my ledger, right next to the column of numbers. The man's name, which I found through my neighbor's son who worked in commercial real estate, was Gerald Fontaine. He was a Nashville-based investor and developer who had been one of Hartwell Event Group's largest clients since 2018. He had been divorced for 2 years. His ex-wife, I later learned, had filed citing a long-term affair. The timeline of that affair, when I checked the court records online, overlapped almost exactly with the period when Christine had first signed him as a client. I hired an attorney named Marcus Webb. Not a famous firm. Marcus worked out of a 2-room office above a sandwich shop on Broadway and charged $225 an hour, which was what I could afford. He was 58 years old, wore the same brown blazer every time I saw him, and had been doing family law in Knox County for 26 years. When I put my ledger on his desk and explained what I had, he looked at it for a long time without speaking. "You documented every transfer?" he asked. "Every one. With dates, account numbers, and a notation of what it was for, and the camera footage. You have it saved off the cloud, copied to 2 external drives and a thumb drive I keep in my truck." Marcus looked at me over his reading glasses. "Daniel, most people come in here with a grocery bag full of crumpled receipts and a lot of feelings. You came in with a case." He closed the ledger. "Let's talk about what we can do with it." Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus and I built the argument carefully. The core of it was straightforward. My contributions to Hartwell Event Group had not been gifts. They had been capital investments in a joint marital enterprise, made with the reasonable expectation of shared ownership. Christine's attorney had been clever. She had made sure no formal equity agreement was ever signed. But the absence of paperwork cuts both ways. A loan agreement had never been signed either. What we had instead was a paper trail of transfers made directly to the business account from joint marital funds over a period of 4 years, totaling $162,000. Marcus brought in a forensic accountant named Patricia Odom, who had spent 15 years untangling small business finances in divorce cases. She reviewed 4 years of Hartwell Event Group's records and produced a report showing that the company's first 3 years of operating capital had come entirely from traceable marital funds. Without that seed money, the business could not have survived its startup phase. She valued my equitable contribution at between 30 and 40% of the company's current worth. The current worth, per an independent business appraiser, was $1.8 million. 30% of $1.8 million is $540,000. Christine's attorney had offered me $60,000 and the furniture. The morning of our divorce hearing was a Thursday in October. I woke up at 5:30 and sat in my workshop for an hour before I got dressed. I wore my good shirt, the blue one I saved for weddings and funerals, and I brought my fireproof box. Inside it was every receipt, every bank statement, every transfer record, a printed copy of Patricia Odom's forensic report, and a USB drive with 14 months of security footage, indexed by date and time with relevant clips bookmarked. The courthouse was a 20-minute drive. Marcus met me at the steps. He was wearing the brown blazer. "How are you doing?" he asked. "That I am ready," I said. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Christine was already seated at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, a younger woman named Holloway, who had an expensive haircut and a leather portfolio that probably cost $800. Christine looked polished and composed. She glanced at me once when I came in and gave me the same small, tolerant smile she had given me across the kitchen table. The smile that said, "This is already over, and we both know it." Gerald Fontaine was not in the courtroom. I thought about that. The judge was a man named Caldwell, mid-60s, a compact man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead who had the manner of someone who had seen every variety of human disappointment and was no longer surprised by any of it. Miss Holloway presented Christine's case first. It was polished and confident. She described Christine as a self-made businesswoman who had built her company through her own talent, vision, and relentless work. She described my contributions as informal gifts made freely during the marriage, noting the absence of any formal investment agreement. She described our marriage as one in which Christine had outgrown a partnership that was no longer reciprocal, and she requested a settlement reflecting the significant disparity in earning potential that made any equal asset split unreasonable. Christine nodded at appropriate moments. She was very good at this. When Miss Holloway finished, Judge Caldwell looked at Marcus. "Counselor." Marcus stood up slowly. He had a way of moving that made you think he had all the time in the world. "Your Honor, my client does not dispute that Christine Hartwell is a talented businesswoman. What my client disputes is the characterization of his financial contributions as gifts. We have documentation showing that $162,000 was transferred from marital accounts directly to Hartwell Event Group over a 4-year period. We have a forensic accounting report demonstrating that those funds constituted the operating capital that allowed the business to survive and grow. And we have testimony from the forensic accountant establishing that my client's equitable contribution to the company's current value is between 30 and 40%. He placed the financial reports on the judge's bench. Miss Holloway was already on her feet. "Your Honor, the absence of a formal investment agreement clearly establishes that these were..." "The absence of a gift agreement," Marcus said calmly, "equally clearly establishes they were not gifts. A transfer of marital funds to a business entity is not a gift by default. It is a contribution. The burden of proof that it was intended as a gift rests with the party claiming that characterization." Judge Caldwell raised one hand without looking up from the documents. Both attorneys went quiet. He read for a while. Then he looked at Patricia Odom's report. Then he looked at the transfer records. Then he said, "Mr. Webb, you mentioned additional evidence." "Yes, Your Honor. We have video footage from a security camera installed at the marital residence that is relevant to the question of intent and disclosure." Miss Holloway's composure finally cracked. "Your Honor, we object to any..." The camera was installed in a common area of a residence owned by my client, with the full knowledge of Mrs. Hartwell, who, in fact, requested the security system be installed. There is no reasonable expectation of privacy in a shared common area. Marcus held up the USB drive. "I would like to play 2 short clips totaling less than 8 minutes that I believe the court will find directly relevant." Judge Caldwell studied him for a moment. Then he said, "I'll allow it." The bailiff set up the equipment. Christine had gone very still. She was staring at the table in front of her with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something between calculation and fear. The first clip was the November recording. My wife walking through the front door of my house with Gerald Fontaine. The two of them on my couch with wine glasses. And then Christine's voice, clear through the camera's microphone. "He doesn't suspect anything. He's just grateful I'm still there." I watched Judge Caldwell's face as he listened. Something moved behind his eyes. The second clip was from the kitchen, 4 months ago. Christine and Gerald reviewing documents. Her voice explaining that the capital contributions had been reclassified. Her reference to the mortgage balance and what I would clear in a sale. And then, I learned a long time ago that the best time to plan an exit is before you make an entrance. The courtroom was completely quiet when Marcus stopped the video. Judge Caldwell took off his reading glasses and set them on the bench. He looked at Christine for a long time. Then he looked at Miss Holloway. "Counselor, does your client have a response to this footage?" Miss Holloway opened her mouth, closed it. She leaned over and whispered to Christine, who was staring at the table and did not respond. "Your Honor," Miss Holloway finally said, "we would request a brief recess to consult." Denied. Judge Caldwell's voice was not raised, but it landed in the room like a weight. He turned back to Christine. "Mrs. Hartwell, your attorney filed pleadings in this court describing your husband's financial contributions as freely given gifts made with no expectation of return. The footage I just watched suggests that characterization was not only inaccurate, but strategically constructed." He picked up the forensic report again. "I am going to need to review this documentation in full before I make any determinations. But I want to be very clear about where this court stands." He set the report down. "When a spouse invests marital assets in a business enterprise, and the benefiting spouse subsequently seeks to characterize those assets as gifts in order to exclude the contributing spouse from equitable consideration, that is not creative accounting. That is fraud on this court." He looked at Miss Holloway. "I strongly suggest you advise your client accordingly." I heard Christine make a small sound. Not a word. Just a sound. The hearing was continued for 3 weeks to allow Judge Caldwell to review the full financial record and Patricia Odom's report. During those 3 weeks, 2 things happened that I had not anticipated. The first was that Marcus received a call from a family law attorney in Atlanta, Georgia. That attorney represented a man named Raymond Stokes, a retired contractor who had divorced a woman named Carolyn Stokes in 2009. Raymond had funded his wife's interior design firm to the tune of $93,000 before she left him. The business had been incorporated under Carolyn's name alone. The divorce settlement had characterized his contributions as gifts. Raymond had accepted it and moved on. Carolyn Stokes was Christine Hartwell's name before she moved to Tennessee. Raymond Stokes had been following a web of records for 12 years and had never been able to find her. Marcus's filing had surfaced through a background check service. Raymond had kept running on a subscription. Raymond's case had already been settled and could not be reopened. But his documentation extended the pattern of Christine's conduct by over a decade. It also revealed that Christine had used a variation of the same strategy twice. Find a hardworking, asset-holding man, cultivate trust over an extended period, invest in a business vehicle funded by his assets under her sole control, then exit cleanly with the accumulated value while classifying his contributions as personal generosity. The second thing that happened was that Gerald Fontaine quietly withdrew as a client of Hartwell Event Group and retained his own attorney. When we returned to court 3 weeks later, Miss Holloway had been replaced by a different attorney from her firm, a senior partner who looked like he would have preferred to be anywhere else. He made a brief statement indicating that his client wished to revise her position down the characterization of the capital contributions. Judge Caldwell looked at him for a moment and then said, "I appreciate that. However, I have now reviewed the full financial record and the forensic accounting report, and I intend to make my own determinations." What followed was 45 minutes of methodical legal reasoning that I will not pretend to have followed in every detail. What I understood was this. Judge Caldwell found that my contributions to Hartwell Event Group constituted a marital investment in a joint enterprise, not a series of personal gifts. He found that Christine's deliberate structuring of the business to exclude me from ownership, combined with her subsequent legal characterization of my contributions as gifts, represented inequitable conduct. He awarded me 32% of the business's appraised value, totaling $576,000, to be paid either through a structured buyout or a forced partial sale of business assets at Christine's election. He also awarded me full title to the house, noting that the equity line I had opened to fund her business had reduced my net equity in the property I had previously owned free and clear. He ordered Christine to assume the remaining mortgage balance. He declined to make additional sanctions from the bench. But he noted, in terms that left no room for interpretation, that he was referring the case record to the State Bar and to the Knox County District Attorney's Office for review of potential perjury and fraud charges relating to Christine's original filings. Christine sat through the ruling without expression. When the judge finished and stepped down, she stood and walked out of the courtroom without looking at me. Her new attorney followed her, talking quietly. I do not know what he was saying. I sat in the courtroom for a few minutes after it emptied. Marcus sat beside me and did not say anything. He understood that this was not a moment that needed commentary. I thought about my father's land, about the storage facility that stood on it now, rows of orange metal doors baking in the Tennessee sun. I thought about the deed transfer I had signed on that Tuesday morning in March, and the kiss on the cheek, and being told I was the most generous man she had ever known. I thought, you were right about that part at least. 14 months after the ruling, Christine settled the buyout through a refinancing of the business. The payment arrived in my account on a Wednesday, the same day I completed a dining table commission for a family in Farragut. I took a photograph of both events, the wire transfer confirmation on my phone screen, and the finished table in my workshop, dovetail joints clean and tight, the oak grain running straight and clear. I keep both photographs in my wallet. Raymond Stokes reached out to me directly after the case was covered in a regional legal newsletter. He was 67 years old, retired, living outside of Birmingham. We talked on the phone for about an hour. He told me he had spent years wondering if he had simply been foolish. I told him that foolish and trusting were not the same word, even though people used them interchangeably. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I wish I had kept better records. I told him I was sorry I had not found him sooner. We still talk occasionally. He is building a deck on his house. He sends me photographs of the framing. Gerald Fontaine, for what it is worth, settled a civil suit brought by his former business partners the following spring. Christine's legal troubles extended beyond my case. I do not track them closely. She had become someone who happened in my past, not someone who continued to happen to me. I live on Maple Ridge Drive. The house is mine again, clear title, no encumbrances. I replaced the windows last fall with double-pane insulated units, the kind I had been meaning to install for years and kept deferring because the money was needed elsewhere. The workshop is warm in the winter now. I take commissions I want to take and decline the ones I do not. I get up at 5:30 and I drink my coffee in the kitchen and I listen to the neighborhood wake up, and I do not feel the particular weight I carried for 9 years without fully recognizing it as weight. I met a woman named Susan at a woodworking expo in Asheville. She is 59, a retired school principal who had taken up furniture making after her own retirement and wanted to ask me about finishing techniques for white oak. We talked for 2 hours about wood grain and Danish oil and the particular patience that hand-cut joints require. She did not ask me what I did or how much I made. She asked me what I was working on, which is a different question entirely. We have been seeing each other for 7 months. She keeps a workshop of her own, a converted garage in Asheville that smells like sawdust and linseed oil and is possibly the most comfortable room I have ever stood in. She makes mistakes and fixes them and does not pretend she did not make them. When I told her about Christine, she listened to the whole thing without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "It sounds like she needed you to be smaller than you were, so she took you apart piece by piece to make it true." I thought about that for a long time. I think she was right. I think Christine had needed a man who would accept the version of himself she offered, diminished and grateful, and too exhausted to look carefully at the paperwork. The trouble was that I had my father's habit of keeping records, and a workshop full of tools, and 63 years of understanding that the integrity of a joint depends on both pieces being sound. She had tried to hollow me out, but she had underestimated how deep the grain ran. I am still standing. The work continues. And for the first time in a long time, everything I build belongs entirely to me. If you have been watching until the end, I would love to know where you are. Drop your city in the comments. You would be surprised how far a story can travel when it belongs to someone who finally decided to tell it. Generosity is not foolishness, even when someone tries to make it feel that way. Daniel kept every receipt, every transfer record, every honest dollar accounted for, not out of suspicion, but because careful men know that integrity lives in the details. When someone tried to erase what he had given, the paper told the truth. Trust the people you love. Just never stop keeping records of what is real. A small note to our viewers. This story was created and imagined with the help of AI, crafted to bring you an hour of meaningful entertainment and carry home a lesson worth holding on to.